Well, welcome everyone to this session of Boise Entrepreneur Week. I'm Jack Boren. I'm a managing director at Epic Ventures, a Utah-based venture capital firm. I'm also an Idaho native, having grown up in Boise and attended Boise High School, North Junior High, and Roosevelt Elementary. My team at Epic has made several investments in Idaho companies and we're passionate participants in the Idaho startup ecosystem. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from the team behind Collective Medical Technologies, a Salt Lake City-based healthcare data and analytics business. Collective Medical was founded in 2005 and after some humble beginnings, grew into one of the largest patient care platforms in the United States, enabling tens of thousands of medical professionals to provide personalized healthcare to tens of millions of patients. Epic Ventures was a fortunate participant in their sole institutional round of financing, a nearly $50 million Series A in 2017. And most recently, in 2020, Collective Medical was acquired by Point Click Care. Despite its headquarters location, Collective Medical is a true Idaho success story, and I think that'll make a little bit more sense in a moment. Today, we get to hear from the three friends behind the business, Adam Green, Chris Klump, and Wiley Vandenacker. Guys, thanks for being here.
Hey, Jack.
Thanks for having us.
Nice throwback to Roosevelt Rough Riders there, buddy.
I like to talk about it. You know, I'm proud of my roots.
Awesome. Wiley and I were right there with you.
Well, let's dig into that. Tell me about the backstory. How do you guys know each other? Tell us about your Boise connection.
So Wiley and I have been friends, super close friends since what? Why? Like we were 4, maybe. We lived a couple hills away up in the Foothills East area. So we used to go romping through a lot of other people's backyards to get to one another's houses. And then Adam and I became friends after being arch rivals in Chuck Slaughter's portable in 10th grade geometry. We had competing lawn care companies, and Adam would make fun of me for mine. I'm pretty sure he can elaborate. Anyway, we became good friends, and then we all went to Brigham Young University together, and we were all roommates there, and been pretty thick as thieves ever since.
How do you think that translates into great business partnership in the long run? I mean, you and Wiley knowing each other since you're 4, obviously. Probably a lot of positive things, and maybe some negatives in there. Tell us a little bit about that.
What do you think? Why?
I think your friendship in business has a mixed bag of benefits and drawbacks. And in fairness, I think more friends who enter into business together don't exit business as friends. I think we've been pretty fortunate. And, I'm not trying to pander to the Boise crew here, but Idaho people are good people, and I think we've got a leg up. It's just, it's a state full of people who are level-headed and thoughtful and kind. And I think we were all three of us the beneficiaries of kind of that mentality that was pervasive in Boise, and still is pervasive in Boise, and I'm really grateful for that kind of an upbringing. It requires a level of candor that is uncomfortable very frequently, and it requires a level of humility that is really challenging quite frequently when your friend is telling you you're an idiot for doing some idiot thing, which happens an awful lot. Well, sometimes you got to just take that with a grain of salt. On the flip side, though, I think the level of trust that we're able to have in one another has been a defining feature of our partnership together. Being able to have complete confidence that Chris is not cooking the books and
embezzling from the company,
not throwing us under the bus on the technology front, and I'm not stealing the data and selling it on the dark web. Is it sounds kind of cheeky to say, but honestly, it's a real thing that we've seen happen in real businesses at large scale, and it can completely ruin them. And being able to have a heightened amount of trust and confidence in your partners, in their integrity and their willingness to work hard and be good actors and good participants is just about invaluable.
Gosh, I'd pile onto that. It's not like we haven't gone at it like cats and dogs from time to time. and that we don't, we certainly don't agree on everything and haven't agreed on everything in terms of the strategic direction of the business over the years. But gosh, not once have I ever questioned, since the very beginning, that Adam and Wiley, did they have my back? Of course they did. And, if I needed them, they would do everything they possibly could to rally. And you're trading on decades of history. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. So if you're willing to have those uncomfortable conversations that Wiley mentioned, and you're willing to care about one another enough to call each other out when something needs to change, you can also trust that people aren't taking cheap shots at you. They're doing it because they care about you. And we all care about this mission that we have in our business, which governs everything. That's pretty powerful. And I also echo Wiley in saying, I think I feel real lucky that, we've come out the other side and we're all still good friends and all care about each other. That's pretty amazing. And I'm grateful for that. And I also agree that I think it has a lot to do with growing up where we grew up and the values that were instilled in us. Boise is a pretty unique community, and that idea of community rallying around one another and, taking a village to raise people, like, Wiley's parents and Adam's parents helped raise me and, instilled values in me that I'm trying to instill in my kids now. And I could like to think probably vice versa with my folks and one another's. And that's a pretty powerful thing.
I really love that as a segue to the next thing I wanted to touch on here. And that's, you look at Collective Medical now, and it's this massive business, hundreds of employees, staggering outcome with point-click care and really driving a massive change in the healthcare ecosystem. And it's easy to forget the humble beginnings, right? And where this even came from. And really touching on family, I would love to unpack the genesis of Collective. Tell us the story, and maybe we'll kick that over to Adam. We'd love to hear, what was the idea that turned into such a massive business?
Sure, Jack, love to. You mentioned we started Collective in 2005, and we were all in college then. And a lot of people ask, how did a bunch of college kids know what to go build for a very complicated healthcare system for hospitals to solve a very nuanced and complicated problem? And my answer has always been pretty simple. I listened to my mom, because the reality was 2005, my mother, Patty Green, was a social worker working at the St. Luke's Hospital in Meridian. And she'd been working on a program for many years to help address and solve problems that she saw with patients who would recurringly come back to the emergency room for care. And the emergency room wasn't able to really fully deliver on the care that the patient needed. And it felt a lot like they were addressing kind of the symptoms and not the root causes. And so she put together a program with others there, and it was very successful, but she wasn't able to scale it and grow it to have the impact that she wanted. So she reached out. She called me. I remember very vividly one day she called me up and she's like, I have this program. I think it'd be great if you turned in a computer program. And I tell Wiley basically the next day, and he starts coding overnight to try to address the problem. And that's kind of how we got our start. And it was pretty slow and organic, because we learned kids don't solve, or hospitals don't buy software from kids in college. But what was pretty amazing was the problem that we were addressing was really on point for emergency physicians. It had already been kind of tested. The product market fit had been tested out by my mother in a lot of ways, and solving this ability for physicians to understand what's going on with the patient more broadly and address those concerns in real time. Those are kind of like the foundational pieces of what our software does. And fortunately, the three of us, we were just able to take that, kind of idea that my mother had, and then, apply some technology and a business model to it to really help it grow and expand. But yeah, started in Boise, from someone who lived in Boise for many years herself. So that's kind of our original genesis.
I love that. And maybe if you can unpack that a little bit further, how's that relationship evolved? As I understand it, that's, it's still a platform used in the area, and, still a big part of the hospital ecosystem up there as well.
Yeah, we're we're in the we're in St. Luke's, their whole system. They're a great partner to us. We're in St. Alphonsus as well. Our software tends to be such that it's pretty agnostic to the health system or provider. It can help stitch together actually a whole state's worth of hospitals to coordinate better with each other. But yeah, we're we're very fortunate that we still have all the major health systems in Idaho using our software and getting value out of it and providing better care for our patients. It's been really awesome.
We've
I
got
love that.
across of Idaho and Primary Health Medical Group and loads of others. And, it's kind of a cheesy comparison, but that same kind of community spirit in Boise that exists, I think we see, with our client partner relationships there as well, which is kind of this premise of the rising tide. Sure. Sometimes folks might compete with one another and sit on opposite sides of a table when they're negotiating a contract, if they're a health plan or health system. But, the software that Collective Medical builds and now Point Click Care builds is really designed to care for vulnerable patients that we all share in common, all have a stewardship for. And how do we help someone who's about to struggle with substance use disorder, or have a substance use disorder, overdose or death? Or how do we help a vulnerable patient who's transitioning from a skilled nursing facility to home, or from a hospital to a skilled nursing facility? How do we help make sure they don't slip through the cracks? And so, we see that same spirit of collaboration all across our network in Idaho as people try to care for our more vulnerable community members. It's pretty amazing.
I love that. You're describing this like really broad platform with massive adoption and really becoming something extremely useful in the healthcare ecosystem. And I think it's often easy again to forget, the journey from 2005 to here. And in particular, I wanted to zero in on one thing you mentioned, Adam, and that's off the bat, you realize hospitals have a hard time buying from college kids. 2005 at the the beginning of the business. And tell us about the journey getting from this idea to initial adoption to and then to growth. But what was the timeline? What was the process like? Were you guys full time with the business? And if not, what were you up to? Tell us about that journey a little bit.
Sure. So our early days, I don't think follow a lot of your classic tech startup paths. We incorporated in 2005. We actually had an LLC at the time, and we built our first version of software because my mother had been doing her program for many years. She had many contacts across the state. We did a lot of road shows, and a lot of them, there's a lot of interest that didn't go anywhere. And so a lot of that initial kind of sales push died down. And we actually kind of went out and got day jobs for a little while because we didn't really know what we were doing too much in the early days. And we said, well, I guess we have to get a job. So we got jobs. But some of those contacts, about a year or so later, we were able to kind of pick up the conversation again and slowly start nurturing the right relationships. And in the early days, it was, I think we're really fortunate because again, we're still pretty young, new in the healthcare space, but because what we built really solved problems in a very specific way for providers in the emergency department space, they became very large advocates for us. So to kind of give you a rough timeline, we wrote that version, one of our software, summer like 2005. Our first hospital went live at the end of 2008. So, there was quite a period there where things slowed down. But once we got that first hospital, we started to get a lot more advocacy from the physicians we were working with. And that first hospital was actually in Washington. We slowly started to just grow organically from there. So kind of 2008 was our first hospital. And by 2012, we basically had a third of the state live, another third in the pipeline that indicated pretty large interest. And then something kind of amazing happened, which was because we'd spent the last kind of 3 years in Washington talking a lot with the directors in the emergency rooms. They knew very well what we did, and a lot of them really wanted to use our software. And the physicians themselves took advantage of some state legislation issues and worked with the state Medicaid in the state of Washington to propose some best practices for hospitals, one of which was to use software very similar to ours. And so it kind of did a did I don't want to say a coup, but it was a pretty ingenious stroke of brinksmanship on the medical physician side, where we got a soft mandate in the state of Washington. So that really kind of jump-started our growth at that point. We got actually the full state to adopt our software after that within about 6 months. That's when we really started to hire folks and consolidate. Wiley and I were living, and Chris were all living in different places at that time. We started to consolidate and hire pretty aggressively. So 2012 is kind of a marker where we, an inflection point where we started to bring on additional staff and things really started to pick up steam at that point. So it's kind of early day timelines. Sometimes it goes a little bit slower than you imagined.
I love that though. I think that's actually something that a lot of entrepreneurs wrestle with, and probably a lot of the people watching this. And that's, trying to understand the balance between having a day job and knowing when the time's right and when the opportunity is right to leave that and focus in on your venture, right? And it's tough. I think a lot of people really struggle with that, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on how you knew it was time and how you made that jump.
I'll give mine, and then Wiley, I'd love to hear yours. And so I think when we started in the early days, as soon as we got our first hospital actually to pay us, Wiley quit his day job and just decided to do this full time, which is a testament to Wiley's dislike of working for others. And so he did that, and it was actually super beneficial for us in the early days. I had a couple of
the whole $500 a year that we were making.
Yeah, let's be clear. Wiley lived in an apartment with other college kids, and paid a college kid's apartment rent. So it wasn't luxurious living by any means, but
I spent $12,000 total that year. I ate a lot of Wendy's.
That apartment had a plenty good couch though, that I got plenty of mileage on. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
But it was good because, bringing on our first customer, we had a lot of changes we need to make in our software. Like, can you build your version 1? You've got this idea of what it's going to be, and then you start getting feedback. You realize probably half of the things need to change. And so it was good. I had some mouths that I needed to feed, so I was a little less able to live that sort of lifestyle. But it got to the point where we were basically already planning for my full time. I was moonlighting basically all the sales calls and everything. And we were really close to making that decision of me going full time and getting back with Wiley when the hospital, the state of Washington, kind of did that soft mandate. So that was just a really easy turning point for us to make that decision.
I want to pick up just a little bit on something that Adam was talking about earlier with his mom working in the vertical. I think one of the lessons learned from me here is that if you want to work in enterprise software, partner with somebody who lives that enterprise every day and as specific as you can get. Solve a specific problem, but take your cues from those people in terms of what problems need to be solved. When it comes to that idea of when do you quit your day job, when do you go all in? There's no universal or global answer to that question. This is an evaluation or an exercise in risk appetite and balancing your own personal risk appetite with the outcome that you're looking to achieve. And I think a great example of that is our story is a good example of that. I was a single guy. I could live on Wendy's, but Adam had a wife and one, maybe two kids by that time. And his risk profile looks an awful lot different than mine did. And so you can't say there are 10 things to look for to say that, yeah, it's time to quit your job. It's sit down, do a thoughtful evaluation, the pros, the cons, the risk that you're willing to take, versus, the upsides and downsides if you do or don't take that risk. Now, with that being said, to me, I felt like our business in spite of my own desire to not like report to someone, I felt like our business, needed a full-time developer. Like, we were getting lots and lots of requests from our very first customer right out of the gate to do this, that, and the other. I mean, they were like, "Hey, dudes, like, can you just receive this HL780T feed?" And I was like, "What's that?" Like, I'm Googling as fast as I can. Adam will tell you, we were on a call with this hospital's IT staff, and they're like, "We'll send you an ADT feed." And I'm like, I don't know what that is. It turns out like it's a pretty core piece of our business. Had no idea what it was. Like, we had a lot of learning and a lot of work to do. And in fact, they were like, "Please send us your specification." And I was like, "Well, how about you send us your specification and then I'll send you mine."
Which looks identical to yours.
Yeah. And they were like, "You can't just send us our specification back with your logo on it. That's not okay." Well, it turns out you can actually, but it was a fight. So I guess the point that I'm just trying to get to is, every business has different needs and every person has different risk tolerance and risk profiles. And
I think we lost Y there for a minute.
Uh-oh.
But amen. Good point. We agree.
I actually think he was at a point that is a perfect segue into another thing I really want to touch on with you guys. And that's you took a bootstrap mentality to this business from day one, and you were finally convinced to raise capital, what seemed like kicking and screaming against, ever having to do that. And I really admire both the approach you've taken to that and kind of the mental models you put into work to ultimately make that decision and raise capital. I think it's in stark contrast to how a lot of people think about running their startup. And that's, thinking about fundraising as a goal, right? Thinking it as a big milestone as opposed to a means to other more important things. And Chris, I'd love to spend some time unpacking that with you specifically. Why did you guys eventually, first off, tell us about the positives of bootstrapping as long as you did, maybe some negatives. And then second, why did you guys ultimately decide to raise capital?
I mean, the obvious negative is we weren't working with you yet, Jack. I mean, that's clear.
I thought that was implied, right? Come on.
Look, I obviously I agree with so much of what's already been said by Adam and Wiley about this idea of, and then I think it's an interrelated idea, but how do you know when to leave your job? Well, how do you know when to raise capital? I think, we read TechCrunch and you kind of hear about these high flying companies out of San Francisco that are overnight successes. And I think that most people forget that that's like almost none of the companies that get started in this country. And there are lots of great companies that get started. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about the ones that fail, which is most of them. But we also kind of don't stop to realize that a lot of them just take a really long time to get going. I mean, think about that, right? What I was saying, 2005, 2008, wasn't just like to get going. It was like nothing. There were no customers. There was nothing. And then we got one customer, and it wasn't like then all of a sudden a whole bunch of customers came. It took years, right? So Wiley went full time in 2010, and then Adam in 2012, and me in 2014. And at the time in 2014, when I came full time, I left Bain Capital. We were doing $1 million. We had just had $1 million in run rate revenue. And so, I kind of look and say, well, gosh, would raising capital at that point have accelerated that chapter of the journey? No, I'm pretty sure we would have amped up our burn, but we wouldn't have found product market fit yet. We wouldn't have found go-to-market fit yet. And actually, fundamentally, the market wasn't quite ready to buy, and certainly not at VC required scale. And so what likely would have happened was that we would have run out of money. We wouldn't have been able to re-up. We had to lay everybody off, and more than likely you would have just shut down the business. Instead of being able to take this very patient approach where we could wait, we could figure it out, we could really understand what the market needed and give the market time to understand what we were doing, because we were in fact creating a market for a product set that did not previously exist. This was not an evolutionary, we're gonna improve something that's already there. This is a categorically new set of capabilities. That, by the way, at the time flew in the face of the paradigm of fee-for-service healthcare, which is, more patients I see, I get paid. Okay, well, got it. Well, our software is trying to keep people from coming to your hospital. And so the conversations with CFOs when something like, well, why would I want that? That doesn't sound very good. And so it wasn't until the market matured more and moved toward a kind of value-based care perspective of sitting and saying, well, actually, wait a minute, like I'm going to do better if I help people stay out of my hospital and I provide better care for them along the way. And that means coordinating with the person across the street that I've historically viewed as my competitor. That's a different market. I don't think that we were ready for VC capital. At the same time, we continued to bootstrap then from 2014 when I went full-time until 2017. By the time we raised money, guys remind me, like, I want to say we were doing like 15-ish million going on 20 million of run rate revenue for our very first dollars in the business, external dollars and for all intents and purposes dollars. And then we raised this $50 million round. And I think the investor community, and Jack, I'd ask you the question, but the investor community is like, whoa, we never even heard of this company. And they're serving hundreds of hospitals and they're doing, close to $20 million of revenue and they've had no capital. And we were at that point, I think it was pretty clear with some reticence about taking on capital, but we realized we were cash starving the business. And there was a lot more growth to be had. And there was a lot more to be built that we weren't building because we didn't have the resources to do it as a bootstrap model, where we were effectively pre-funding all of the growth off the cash flows of the business. And it wasn't that our unit economics weren't sound, they were. But when you're trying to hyperscale a company growing over 100% a year, which is what we had been doing, it was cash starving. And at the same time, one of the downsides of not raising sooner is that this enabled competitors to see what we were doing and then go raise capital. And we learned the lesson of never underestimate a determined competitor with a war chest, right? So our one of our biggest competitors raised over $100 million, right? We were just thinking about raising our first amount. So, we should probably get on that. Kind of what was the downside of that? I remember the day that we closed our round, I walked out of the office and, was a little tearful and realized like what had been a pretty supernal chapter of pride in bootstrapping was over. And that things were going to change, and they changed a lot. And mostly actually, I'd say for the better. Like we loved our syndicate. It was it was, Peterson Partners here in Salt Lake. It was Kleiner Perkins and Bessemer Venture Partners in Maverick. Out of the Bay, amazing investors who were amazing humans who cared about our mission and what we were doing. And yet Kaiser Permanente and Providence and Intermountain Healthcare and 3M and California Healthcare Foundation, like incredible folks on the strategic side who believed in what we were doing and wanted to advance it. And so we did. And if you look at our growth, starting 2017 up, it shot up. It took a while and there was some pain along the way. We had to grow up. We had to grow up in our governance, right? We had to institutionalize how we showed up at a board meeting and holding ourselves accountable and more rigorously using KPIs and OKRs, to measure progress against our strategic and operational objectives. So net, I think it was a phenomenal thing that we probably should have done sooner than we did. The upside is you retain more of your business by the time you raise. The downside is you might have been able to grow more in the first place. So it's pros and cons, but the point that you made earlier, I couldn't agree more with. Raising capital is not the milestone, and patience matters. I was with a great entrepreneur earlier this week at breakfast, who's just closing around at $1 billion valuation on a very small amount of revenue, and he's been building his company for 5 years, 5 years without much progress, and then it's kind of he figured it out. He found the fit. It's amazing, and the market wants to fund it, and he'll grow like gangbusters. He already is starting to. Right. I think you got to be patient sometimes and know when the right time to do it is. But I think it's a naive perspective to just sprint after capital for the sake of capital, which itself is a commodity when the business isn't ready. And I think few things are more damaging than prematurely or overcapitalizing a business before it's ready to absorb that capital and grow appropriately. I don't know why, Adam, I know you guys have thoughts on this. Anything you'd add?
One perspective that I heard from our good friend, Matt Marsh, talking about Collective Medical once in front of a group of investors. He described the company as having grit, and that is a ill-found trait in many businesses these days. And I thought that was a nice way to describe it. It's not easy to bootstrap. I mean, it's really easy to go get money and throw money after problems and hire a lot of people and hope something sticks. But that's that is a risky way to start a business. And I think overall has a negative impact on the startup itself and the ecosystem. Other businesses raising capital and participating in that startup ecosystem. I'm a pretty big believer that grit matters in starting businesses, and running scrappy and lean and working really, really hard. Sometimes for a lot of years pays off and builds enduring, valuable businesses that have something real to show and result in something that the entrepreneur can be proud of.
I love that. No, it's just fantastic. And Adam, I'm going to throw this last one at you. I'm very sad to say that we're running out of time here. There's just a million things we could unpack. But you guys went through this incredible transaction at the end of 2020, massive outcome, and now this new vision, new mission. And tell us a little bit about that. What's next on the horizon?
Well, right now, for me personally, like the biggest thing on the horizon is just to ensure a continued good integration and assimilation with our new parent company, Point Click Care, and to kind of realize what were the calculus for why we wanted to do the deal in the first place. And so I think we've been fortunate the last couple of years. We've always had companies kind of circling around the periphery, poking to see if there was any interest in acquiring. And none of that looked super interesting to us until last year when we met with Point Click Care and saw a combined vision that we thought actually was bigger than what we could do ourselves. And that was really exciting. And so, there's for me personally, there's a lot invested in just trying to make sure that we have that good handoff. Like when we were acquired, we had about 200 individuals working at the company. These are people with families and homes and dreams of their own. And I feel a sense of responsibility to make sure like they still feel like, there's a place for them in the broader organization, and they still can achieve a lot of those mission-oriented things that we've always been striving for. That's kind of short term. What's on the roadmap for me. Beyond that, I try not to get too caught up in all of the what ifs and what could be's when I feel like we still got a lot of meaty challenges ahead of us. Broader mission-wise, with Point Click Care, and Chris probably can add even more depth on this. Like one of the biggest things for us when we were evaluating, Point Click Care as an acquirer was, is there alignment with their culture, their values, and what they're striving to do as an organization? And it was kind of wild because Point Click Care has some similarities to Collective. It's also founder owned and led, just like Collective was. They care a lot about their employees. They care a lot about impacting patient care. And you would think that most, that should be the case for a lot of healthcare tech startups or companies. It's not always the case. And so like that sort of alignment was really, for me personally, like a big piece of the decision making. And so I feel like we're in a great place. Like we're in the best home we could be in out of all the kind of entities out there, which really has me excited. Chris, I don't know if you've kind of got thoughts broader than that, but.
I agree with all of that. I think so often, again, in that same spirit of entrepreneurs focus on the raise instead of, what the raise enables, which is, achieving your mission. And then as a for-profit business, hopefully producing positive cash flows at some point. I think folks often also kind of myopically obsess over the exit and from a perspective of shareholder value creation, and shareholders, of course, are an important stakeholder, and I think we feel extremely strongly about this. Shareholder interests, we believe, are at parity with, two other stakeholder groups, which are your teammates and your customers, and in our case, the patients that they serve. And so you have to think about those interests at parity with one another and trying to optimize for them. As we thought about the balance of when is the right time to exit, it became pretty clear there were puts and takes, but this was a phenomenal outcome for all of our stakeholders. And so we felt really good about that, had peace with that decision, which is otherwise a bittersweet decision. It's hard to let go of something that you build and you bleed and sweat over for so many years. And yet that was the case. And I think we're only 9 months in, 10 months in, but so far, all of the commitments that Point Click Care made to us as an organization, they've honored. And gosh, like that doesn't always happen. And we feel really lucky and grateful to get to be aligned with them as a result.
Guys, this has been fantastic. I wish we could just keep this going for a little bit longer. We're coming to a close. Now, I want to bring one more thing up before we do formally close. Chris, correct me here, but I think you said at the beginning of this that since the acquisition, had you hired 150 people, or do you have 150 job openings? So remind me, where are you at? It sounds like you're on a hiring spree.
Yeah, I think it's actually about both. Probably over the first 9 months of this year, we've hired 150, 160 new folks. And I think we've got slots open on just our team. So I think we're around 300 and change right now, and out of 2,000 total. And I think just on our team, we've got another 100 something, slots open. So for all over the country, but we love them when they can be nearby.
Guys, this is fantastic. Great mission, great team, and a great opportunity for anybody listening to apply and join up and be part of the mission. So thank you. Can't thank you enough for what you've done and for joining us today.
Thanks, Jack.